What's going on, everybody? Haunted Beard here. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to review a new release that just dropped and is available on streaming now on Screambox, a movie called The Outwaters. This is actually one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and it is a found footage horror film. I just gave it a watch, wanted to give you my thoughts. Let's get into it. So The Outwaters tells the story of four travelers who experience a strange phenomena while out camping in a remote stretch of the Mojave Desert. And as I said, this is a found footage horror film. And the video comes from 4 memory cards that were recovered in the desert from the recording of our main character, who's played by a guy by the name of Robbie Banfitch, who also served as the film's director and writer. And I really feel that The Outwaters is going to be a pretty divisive movie. It's going to be a love it or hate it type deal. And this is kind of an interesting one because by and large, this is not a character-driven film or really even a plot-driven film. And I feel like saying that, like if I would have known that going in, I would have really lowered my expectations for this thing. Because if you don't really have much to the characters or much to the plot, 9 times out of 10, I'm pretty much out. So the main selling point in this really comes in the second half of the movie, and I'll get there in just a minute. But the first half of the movie, this is, I would say, a really kind of stays true to kind of the found footage formula. And the first half of this film is very just raw and kind of choppy, and is really just put together like a pretty genuinely authentic piece of found footage, as it's just kind of these random little scenes, and it just kind of jumps around, and he's just kind of filming random stuff, and there's not really much cohesion to it. It's just kind of here and there. You meet a couple people, and he's just, you know, having little conversations, chit-chatting here and there. And there's just not really much to it in that first half. And really the plot that we get here, we learn that the main character, Robbie, is taking his brother and 2 of his friends into the desert to film a music video with one of the girls. She's a musician, and they thought the Mojave Desert would be a cool place to film a music video, so that's where they go. That's how they end up where they're at. And that's really all the plot that we get out of this thing. Also, as I said too, there's not really much to the characters, and we don't really learn much about them at all. And I understand that that's not really the point of the movie. The point of the movie, as I said, is really all about this second half. And as far as the first half goes, it's pretty boring. There's not really much there. There's not much there in terms of, as I've said, character or story to really kind of latch onto or really kind of pique your interest. And that is until we get to the second half of the movie. And I'll keep this spoiler free, but what ends up happening, and really when you kind of get the shift, when the horror element really clicks into gear and this movie turns from just a whatever sort of found footage into a horror film, is they're out, obviously, in the desert, it's at night, and they keep hearing these sounds that sort of sound like thunder, but they're a little bit different, and so they go out to investigate, and then, I'll just say, all hell breaks loose. And from that point forward, the last half, like 50 minutes of this movie, is pretty much just this found footage, horrific, insane amusement park ride. And that's really what this movie's selling point is just the overall experience of this second half. And I think Robbie Banfitch should be commended because it is pretty impressive how long he is able to sustain this just completely insane and chaotic and intense and suspenseful sequence for like 50 minutes of the movie. And so I think he deserves some credit there because, again, the last half of this movie is just this pretty intense and crazy ride. And in some way, I couldn't help but kind of making a bit of a comparison to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just because the first half of that movie, there's not really much going on. These people are just kind of wandering around. And then obviously when you see Leatherface from that point on, the movie is just, it cranks it up to 11 and is just all out insanity up till the very end. And that's kind of what this movie is doing. Now, in terms of how he pulls off the latter half of this movie, this is really where it's going to be kind of the make it or break it for a lot of people, because this is a really good kind of example of a less is more type of thing. There is a lot of the second half of this movie where he is just out in the pitch black dark, and 90% of the screen is black, and all you can see is what is illuminated by his flashlight, just this little circle of light on the screen. And so it's very kind of minimal, and you really just kind of have to let your imagination run wild. And for me personally, that sort of technique I found to be pretty effective. I found the second half of this movie to be a pretty entertaining and thrilling ride. And so because he chooses not to show a whole lot, and even though you don't see a whole lot, I would say there's still a pretty good amount of blood and guts in this that will kind of scratch that itch. But because he refrains on a lot of the visuals and seeing a whole lot, he really has to deliver in terms of the sound and the audio. And I really think the sound design in this movie is pretty great. And again, it's one of those things to where you can't see much, but he edits in a lot of just sensory overload on your ears. And a lot of the sound effects, a lot of just the noises and stuff like that, I found really effective. And I'll give a particular example. Again, no spoilers, but there's a scene where he sees somebody out at night, and you see a silhouette of somebody, and you can't really see what's happening. And then all of a sudden you hear these really fast footsteps, you hear a sound, and then you hear what sounds like just this blood dripping and splashing on the ground. And you can't see any of this, but your imagination fills in all the imagery. And I was just really impressed by that little scene. Again, the audio here has to be on point to kind of sell this sort of technique that he is doing. And I think for the most part, it really works. And by and large, I just really bought into the whole experience of this movie, and I found it to be quite effective. And there were just a few moments where I was just sitting on my couch watching it, where I realized my feet and my hands were tightly clenched, as again, it's just kind of this insane, crazy white knuckle ride. But here's the thing with the Outwaters. Because it is devoid of really any sort of character development and really any sort of plot, it doesn't really add up to a whole lot. And as I said, it is a fun ride, and I did enjoy that second half of the movie, but it's one of those things to where the director is just making this as crazy and as insane as he possibly can, just for the sake of making it as crazy and insane as he possibly can. It doesn't really serve, any sort of kind of narrative structure, any sort of story beyond just things get crazy. And there's not a whole lot of depth beyond just kind of the surface level. And there is a hint of kind of a sci-fi element to this, and I don't want to get into any sort of specifics, but you can basically kind of figure out kind of what happens to cause all the insanity that eventually unfolds. And so because of that, he kind of just sort of gets a free pass to just, paint the wall with all sorts of madness. And again, it's a pretty fun and entertaining ride, but there's just not much to it beyond that. But to wrap this thing up, though, I would still recommend this, especially if you're a fan of found footage horror. I think it is at least worth checking out to just go on that ride and experience just the complete insanity of the second half of this. And so overall, I still enjoyed myself. I still had a pretty good time with it. So with that being said, I'm going to give the Outwaters a 7 out of 10. And so those are just my thoughts. Hit me up, though, down in the comments below. Let me know if you've seen this, what your thoughts were. Like I said, I think it's going to be pretty divisive. It just kind of depends if sort of his technique and what he does and how he sort of captures and films the second half of this is really going to be the make it or break it. For some people, the less is more approach is really going to work. For other people, they're going to be probably really underwhelmed and disappointed. But hit me up down in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. That's all I got for you. If you like videos like this, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. This is what I do on The Haunted Beard. It's all horror and thriller movie content coming at you. So hit that button, and I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.